School of Regulation has the honor to have to host today a webinar about new technologies in methane emissions. And using this opportunity, I really wanted to invite two of the leading scientists in the area to join our discussion club. There is issues that are really interested us all, that goes beyond methane emissions. And one of the issues for me was definitely response to COVID-19 crisis. In my country, in a lot of other countries, what I saw is very positive. It was very concentrated relations of politics towards the science. So what was done in my country always was done by scientific advice. Even strangely enough, in my country also, we could see scientists speaking, less politicians, well, for better or worse. Sometimes they spoke, but it was really good symbiosis between the research, science, and politics. And when the COVID-19 crisis is being over, then the question definitely is, what would you expect from politics and science relations? Will this COVID-19 crisis make a better symbiosis, or we were turning to business as usual, or you would expect some third way out of this crisis that makes this society stronger, or perhaps makes the society weaker? So who would start? Stephen Hamburg is Chief Scientist from Environmental Defense Fund, and Ilse Aben is Senior Scientist from Netherlands Institute for Space Research. So the floor is open.
Yeah, well, yeah, maybe I'll give it a try. So I have to say, in the Netherlands, where I come from, I have seen the same thing that you have been mentioning now, that politicians really look at scientists to gather as much as possible knowledge that they need to take their decisions on. And yeah, in a way, I'm not sure if it surprised me, but it is a change from what we've seen so far. I think it made perfect sense, but then again, you never know how it happens. So I have the same experience. Now, how that will translate after COVID, I really do not know, because as you're saying, we might return to business as usual. I think it depends very much on how long this will still go on, what the overall impact will be. I'm not so sure if I'm that optimistic that I think people will learn from this, that they see that some things are really to the limit in what we're doing. For example, meat industry, I'm seeing terrible things happening, and that's really because we take these things to the limit. But I don't know how things will change. I hope it will change our society a bit, being more careful, but I don't know. I really don't know.
Steve, what is your point on this?
Well, I certainly, I think we all see that, you know, the visibility of science increased with COVID. And as you would expect, right? Because we need the experts to be able to help us find our way out. But I guess I'm not quite as skeptical. I saw some recent data, polling data before COVID, that still showed scientists were trusted. We don't always recognize that because it becomes politics often mask that. And I think what's happened with COVID, and I hope has happened, and I think is happening, is that the trust in science has been strengthened. It was already there. And what we hope is that the politicians recognize that science provides the foundation for progress of humanity, and protecting the climate is part of that, protecting our health is part of that. And so I'm hopeful that this just reminds everyone that modern society is built on science. Our prosperity is built on science. And when we turn our back, we get in trouble. And here in the United States, I think that's been reinforced by the many governors who are very highly viewed by the public because their scientists are standing on at their side. They're letting the science drive. And their approval ratings, independent of political party, have been very high. So those politicians who said, I need my scientists, we're going to do what the science requires, have been rewarded politically. And I'm hoping that that will take away that political edge that unfortunately adds to science sometimes. Scientists don't make policy. We shouldn't. I'm not a policy maker. That's not my area of expertise. But we do need that foundation of science, and sometimes we forget that.
Coming out of COVID-19, how do you expect consumption will change? So there is a lot of speculations that people are now using more bikes, more electric transport. There is also huge packages influence more cleaner mobility. Perhaps we will eat less meat, or what would your expectations, well, not expectation, but your theory, will this crisis affect consumption patterns seriously that would need to be taken into account, or it will be more business as usual?
I'm going to, Ilse's
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Steve.
Well, I just think we have to be, it's dramatic, right? Most of humanity, we've not seen something like this where our patterns are changed. So you think, oh, change has occurred. But change tends to happen pretty slowly. And I think that we're going to see a return, maybe not all the way, which would be good. We're going to change our patterns. We're seeing it in the commuting patterns in Beijing, where China have opened up more than most of the of developed countries has. I can't imagine that those won't go closer back to what was before, because that's where the infrastructure. If you're in a place where you could bike and you didn't, maybe that changed because you got used to it. But if you're dependent on a car now to get to where you used to use a train or public transit, most people will go back to the public transit, because boy, at least for me personally, I don't want to spend all that time in a car driving, and the congestion, of course, is way worse in Beijing than it was before, understandably. So I think we're going to see some incremental change. I guess I'm an incrementalist. I don't believe step function change happens that frequently, and I'm not seeing the drivers of that change. But my crystal ball is no better than anybody else's. So I've never lived through this. This is based on no direct knowledge, and I could be completely wrong.
Ilse.
Yeah, it's hard to say what real changes will occur. I don't know. But what we'll see is that I certainly use public transport every day to go to work. Not at the moment, of course, since mid-March. I will need some time to get used to and to trust again that I can do that, because I also don't want to go into a car to my work every day. So it will take some time, but at a certain point you will find that trust again, I think. What maybe small changes will stick, like people working more from home. I think that one will actually stick here in my country, I think, because I think there's always been a bit of, maybe distrust in a way, that if people work at home, they might not be so effective. But I think this certainly helped to overcome this problem. So I think but we're talking small changes at best, I think. But again, I also don't have this crystal ball.
Well, now we move to methane emissions. Maria.
Okay, yes, but let me put it into maybe broader perspective, because over the course of the last 50 years, we had a lot of different pollutants and environmental problems to tackle. And when we look at the literature, there are some good examples of how to reduce pollution very fast and at relatively low cost. And for instance, we have the case of sulfur dioxide trading, which proved to be successful, but it turns out that it was due to some developments that allowed to reduce those emissions. And in that case, we can say that continuous emissions monitoring at relatively low cost was a real game changer to reduce sulfur dioxide emissions. So what could be the game-changing development in terms of methane emissions reduction, in your opinion?
Well, I think we just had a webinar where somebody said that these satellite observations actually will bring about a revolution. And it's always a bit difficult, because I've been part of actually developing these measurements. So I prefer other people saying it, but I think it's true. I think one of the game changers that is out there now is these satellite observations, and they still need further improvement, but they will come. And because now we will actually, I think the person mentioned in the webinar, they can't hide anymore. But also it's a matter of maybe not really consciously knowing how much methane was actually being emitted at different locations. And so far, people base themselves on estimates based on activity data, but we're now actually really measuring it, and we're measuring it globally and with the same instrument globally. And you can also use other satellite instruments, but at least the global picture you get with one and the same instrument. And I think that's really, yeah, I think that will certainly give a big push.
So I agree with Ilse, and I would say it's making the invisible visible. So one of the key things when we pay attention to those things that we're aware of and we recognize their impacts. We've seen this time and time again with pollutants, whether it's PCBs, where the technology wouldn't allow us to see them in the environment because the concentration is too low. When James Lovelock developed the instrument, the electron capture detector, and all of a sudden we could measure it, we realized we had a serious pollution problem when we changed the role of PCBs and we got rid of them because they were a major contaminant. Well, methane's no different. Our ability to measure over the last few years with new instruments has made it more visible. And then with the use of remote sensing and better remote sensing and making all that data public, all of a sudden, everyone will be aware of how much is being emitted, where it's being emitted, and how much impacts it's having on your climate. And the good news for methane, not just for oil and gas methane, but particularly oil and gas methane, is there are lots of available technologies at little to no cost to reduce it. So this is one of these wonderful situations where you can not only fix it, but you can do it in a way that doesn't require a high cost. And there's agricultural opportunities as well, ubiquitous, but they're not just in oil and gas. There's also opportunities in agriculture.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe just a follow-up question, because today we also discussed the idea of introducing carbon border adjustment tax. So do you think that just information is enough to stimulate the business and to act and to reduce methane emissions, or there should be some other measures introduced following the better data?
Well, you've got two scientists here, not policymakers or policy experts, but I'll just say that I certainly, as a scientist, so this is not my area of expertise, it's an and, right? Good data, voluntary action, and regulation is required because you need to make sure that the good actors are rewarded and there's a penalty for those who don't. The voluntary action can get us part of the way there, but I don't know of any evidence, at least in this sphere, just like you mentioned the sulfur. The sulfur reductions were not just voluntary. Maybe the early actors were voluntarily taking them on, but they were then met with regulations, and that the early actors helped to get the market started, and the regulations furthered that so that it became very cost effective to reduce sulfur with very, very large societal benefits as well as environmental benefits. So this is an and, not an or.
I totally agree with Steve, and also the climate issue is just too urgent a matter to just wait if voluntarily we're going to get there. I don't think, no, that's not going to be the way, I think. So indeed, we need to do it all.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I think they are very good responses.
Well, I would conclude with the final question. How do you expect the methane emissions policy globally to evolve? So with speed, slowly, controversially, what would be your expectations in this respect? Yes, you are right, you are scientists, but I think also scientists working for this purpose would like to see action. And well, how you estimate how the action will come?
Again, I'm also not an expert in this field. We definitely want to see action. But I have to say that I'm already seeing much more action around this topic the past, months than I've seen years before. So I'm suddenly feeling confident that actually things might happen. But I realize that it needs a lot of pushing from a lot of people at the right levels to actually get something done. But I think that actually showing data and pointing things out really also helps. And that's the part where certainly we will be able to contribute to.
So I agree with Ilse. I started working on methane from oil and gas now just about 10 years ago. And we've already seen dramatic increase in interest in the issue. We're seeing countries taking regulations. Now that is not, we shouldn't applaud that, but it's, I think, a positive indication. We're going to see an acceleration. There's every indication, because when people realize, when policymakers and the public realize this is a very big lever, which gives you a real advantage to starting to really positively impact the climate, why would we not do that? And you can do it cost effectively. It's one of those situations where there's the ability to bring the data, to create that transparency over the past few years with greatly enhanced scientific capacity and understanding, now gives the policymakers options and that they didn't have just a few years ago. So it's going to take a lot of hard work, but we see a conversation in capitals around the world that was not there a few years ago, and we need to be vigilant, but with focus on those options and the reality of what we know, we can make a big difference, and we just got to keep pushing to see that reality occur.
Well, I think it was a very strong statement, and I would like to finish there. Our guests today have been Steven Hamburg, Chief Scientist, Environmental Defense Fund, and Ilse Aben, Senior Scientist, Netherlands Institute for Space Research. Thank you very much for your time that you shared with us. Thank you, and have a nice day, and well, a lot of success in your work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.